Most people don't think the World Bank and human rights go together, and this belief is not without cause. Since the bank's creation, many of its projects have put vulnerable communities in harm's way, forced people off of their traditional lands, and damaged the environment. One reason bank-funded projects produced so much harm in the organization's early years was the lack of adequate policies to protect communities and the environment. In addition, the World Bank cannot be held accountable by domestic or international courts because these institutions lack jurisdiction over international organizations. Essentially, if a community suffers social or environmental harm due to a bank project, there is no traditional court it can turn to for justice. In response, the human rights community and governments that fund the bank pushed it to create two quasi-judicial bodies to keep it accountable: the Inspection Panel and Compliance Advisor Ombudsman, or CAO. These are independent bodies within the World Bank that investigate complaints filed by or on behalf of project-affected communities. When the Inspection Panel and CAO find evidence of project-related harm, they order the bank to make things right. This can mean issuing a formal apology, changing or stopping its projects, and/or compensating communities. Since the 1990s, the two bodies have received hundreds of complaints from communities alleging project-related harms. And in some of the first cases I reviewed, I found the Inspection Panel and CAO offered communities significant relief and redress. Despite the potential significance for human rights enforcement, social scientists haven't systematically investigated Inspection Panel and CAO cases. In particular, who brings cases, what cases are about, who wins, or why they win. I set out to answer these questions with my colleague Ben Graham and a team of undergraduate researchers in the Security and Political Economy Lab at the University of Southern California. To do this, we built a dataset that captures details of every case that has ever come before the Inspection Panel, or CAO. With 239 cases between 1993 and 2017, this was no small feat. With these data, we were able to test hypotheses we developed about the kinds of complaints and the kinds of communities we thought were most likely to succeed. First, we noticed that in response to pressure from the human rights community and donor governments, the World Bank developed fairly strict regulations for projects that deal with indigenous communities, involuntary resettlement, and the most environmentally sensitive projects, the types of projects with potentially unprecedented impacts. This led us to theorize that complaints about any of these three things would be more likely to succeed due to the bank's stricter performance standards. Second, we theorized that complaints from communities who are supported by NGOs would be more likely to succeed because NGOs have the technical skills and organizational capacity to bring higher quality complaints. Were we right? My team found strong support for some of our hypotheses, but not for others. To start, we found support for our hypothesis about complaints filed by Indigenous communities. We discovered that Indigenous communities are twice as likely to receive a formal apology from the bank as non-Indigenous communities. Similarly, Indigenous communities are twice as likely to win an order for project change. So it appears that stricter safeguards for these groups improve justice outcomes. Next, we found mixed support for our hypothesis about involuntary resettlement complaints. We found that the Inspection Panel and CAO are not significantly more likely to offer an apology or order a project to be modified. However, we did find that the Inspection Panel and CAO are 3 times more likely to order compensation for resettled communities. Finally, we found no support for our hypothesis about the most environmentally sensitive projects, those projects that the bank had already flagged as likely to cause serious harm. Despite the seriousness of the complaints, we found that the Inspection Panel and CAO are not more likely to offer redress for communities living in now degraded environments. We speculate that the bank is less likely to offer restitution for these types of complaints because it views some environmental change as a necessary consequence of development. This first set of findings is useful for understanding the types of complaints that succeed in the World Bank's accountability system. But what role do NGOs play? We found that NGO support is strongly associated with complaint success. This makes sense because NGOs have the informational, linguistic, and technical skills to effectively file quasi-legal complaints. Without NGO support, many project-affected communities lack the resources they would need for their complaint to succeed. As part of the research process, we interviewed directors, representatives, and other staff from NGOs that have supported complaints at the inspection panel and CAO, people familiar with how NGOs choose and support community complaints. One thing our interviews revealed is that NGOs sometimes screen complaints and prioritize cases they think will do well. So, NGOs may have a high record of success, not only because they are especially well-resourced or technically sophisticated, but because they are picking winners. Our findings indicate that, despite the international perception that the World Bank and human rights don't go together, the bank has made some noteworthy improvements. First, by developing and strengthening safeguards, and second, by creating the inspection panel and CAO. Admittedly, complaints before the inspection panel and CAO represent only a fraction of social and environmental harms generated by World Bank projects. But through the inspection panel and CAO, the bank does a decent job at remedying harms. So, what does our research mean for the future of human rights and development finance? While the World Bank was the first development bank to establish accountability mechanisms, many others have since created similar institutions. Unfortunately, these copies were made before we knew much about the originals and their performance. So it's possible that these other banks replicated not only the strengths, but also the weaknesses of the inspection panel and CAO. Future research should investigate the benefits and drawbacks of copying the World Bank's accountability mechanisms. If we better understand these bodies, we have a good shot at improving them. In this way, we can create a more just international development system.